For those who call Pittsburgh home, it is hailed as a miracle. For fans of the Raiders, it is deemed a conspiracy. It is the most iconic play to have ever occurred in the National Football League. You've probably seen the image of a number 32 with hands stretched catching pigskin just above the turf. For sure you've heard the biblical name the play has become known as, the Immaculate Reception. In just 17 seconds on a frigid December afternoon along the forks of the Ohio, a turning point occurred for not just American football, but also the legacy of the city of Pittsburgh. Before the 1972 season, it would seem overly ambitious to consider Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania hosting a playoff game. Founded in 1933, the city's football club originally aped the name of its successful baseball team. It would not be until the 1940 season that it gained the title of Steelers. It did little to improve the odds on the gridiron. In 39 seasons, the Steelers only had made it to the playoffs once, and in that game they didn't score a single point. Although they had upgraded to a state-of-the-art multi-purpose stadium known as Three Rivers in 1970, the Steelers' first 2 seasons were mediocre. The first 4 games of the 40th season showed similar signs, trading wins and losses evenly. But things quickly changed as the Steelers went on a 5-game winning streak. A large part of this turnaround was the Steelers' first-round draft pick, Franco Harris. A running back born in Fort Dix, New Jersey, he played 4 All-Star seasons for Penn State University. He was rushing an average of 75 yards per game and electrifying the Steelers' offense in a manner Pittsburgh had never seen before. The fans, however, demonstrated little of that excitement. Years of losing seasons had jaded much of the crowd. It appears that it would take an army to lift the spirits of the crowd. Enters Tony Stagno and Al Vento. Both men were Pittsburghers who had made a living from their respective bakery and pizza parlor, eateries frequented by both players and fans of the Steelers. For offensive guard Sam Davis, they became acquainted with the rookie sensation and found a common thread. Stagno, Vento, and Harris all had Italian ancestry. Stagno and Vento came up with the idea of creating a fan club based not around the Steelers, but around Harris himself. Dubbed Franco's Italian Army, they would don military garb and decorate themselves in the colors of the Italian flag and make as much noise they could whenever the offensive line took to the field at Three Rivers. Harris gave them their blessing to use his name, and the 2 Italian food men set out gathering their first recruits. The bulk of the initial members were family members of the Stagno and Ventos, but soon came to recruit throughout Pittsburgh's Italian community. Funny enough, a real-life colonel made up the ranks of Franco's Italian Army, that being John Danzilli. Danzilli used his connections from a local armory to outfit everyone with the necessary helmets to pull off the military aesthetic. On November 15, 1972, Franco's Italian Army made their debut, positioned below the press box in sections 29 and 30 at Three Rivers Stadium. The Steelers would need an army as they faced the Kansas City Chiefs' defensive line, which kept Harris from getting much yardage in the first half. The Chiefs had a 7-0 lead at halftime, but starting in the third quarter, fortune began to favor the black and gold. While the team's quarterback, Terry Bradshaw, struggled with getting the ball in the air, Harris managed to press the ball through the thick of the Chiefs' blockers. With 3 field goals from kicker Roy Jarella, the Steelers edged the score 9-7. In the final minutes, Harris surpassed 100 yards rushing for the 4th consecutive game and scored the game-winning touchdown. The Steel Curtain, Pittsburgh's famed defensive line of Dwight White, Ernie Holmes, L.C. Greenwood, and Mean Joe Green, did the rest of the work. A successful first outing for Franco's Italian Army. Although the Steelers would lose the following week's game in Cleveland, many in Pittsburgh came to sense the 72 team could be legit contenders for champions. Franco's Italian Army grew in sound and presence with each passing home game. While Harris was facing a weekly struggle to put points on the board for the Steelers, Stagno and Vento were struggling with the most basic of military complications, feeding your soldiers. 2 seats were purchased for each home game just to store the food of the Army. It wasn't MREs they were stashing, however. Hoagies consisting of salami, pastrami, capicola, and provolone was the most common food, but imported cheeses, olives, and pepperoni were always in ample quantity. Baked goods and stuffed eggplant would be carried by the panful and became renowned throughout the stadium. So renowned that broadcasters like WTAE's Myron Cope would often leave the press box to enjoy a tasty treat. The Army even found a way to smuggle wine into the stadium by hollowing out whole loaves of bread. Quickly, different factions of the Army began to span off, including Franco's Black Army, Franco Harris' Irish Brigade, the Israeli Brigade of Franco's Army. But soon other fan clubs sprouted in the stands: Jarrella's Guerrillas, Bradshaw's Brigade, even a foreign legion for running back John Frenchy Fuqua. With friendly competition, the Italian Army reminded everyone in the stands who ran Three Rivers by bringing extra firepower. Denzilli managed to not only get a Jeep into the stadium, but also a full-sized military truck equipped reportedly with a 105mm howitzer. The Army began to attain high-profile members, with the most noted induction being Frank Sinatra on the eve of the final regular game of the season. Not only had the Steelers finished with a winning season, Franco Harris had rushed for over 1,000 yards, rushing over 100 yards in 6 consecutive games. He was named the Rookie of the Year by the Sporting News, as well as being nominated to the Pro Bowl. And for the first time in 25 years, the Pittsburgh Steelers had made the playoffs. Problem for the Steelers, who had clocked in a 7-3 record, was the Oakland Raiders. Coached by John Madden, the Raiders had been in the playoffs the past 4 out of 5 seasons. The Raiders' defensive line was one of the few that rivaled the Steel Curtain in brutality. With the Steelers clinching the AFC Central and the Raiders the AFC West, both were set to face off at Three Rivers Stadium on December 23, 1972, for the divisional round of the playoffs. The Raiders had lost their opening game to the Steelers back in September and were returning to the Steel City to exact revenge. In 1972, the NFL still imposed blackouts on home teams' television outlets. As such, only Steeler fans like Franco's Italian Army, all packed within Three Rivers Stadium that December afternoon, would be able to see the game live. Raiders fans in California would be able to watch through NBC. The game commenced at 1 p.m., temperatures just above 40 degrees. The first 30 minutes of play were scoreless as both teams' defense stalled any drive on the end zone. Only in the third quarter did Jarrella notch a 18-yard field goal to put the Steelers up 3-0. By the fourth quarter, the Raiders had succeeded in keeping Harris under 50 yards rushing. Madden had replaced his starting quarterback, Darryl LaMonica, with Kevin Stabler to find a way through the Steel Curtain. Jarrell scored a second field goal, giving the Steelers a 6-0 lead. But Madden's switch paid off, as with less than 2 minutes to go in the game, Stabler ran for 30 yards to score a touchdown, which stunned the Italian Army. With an extra point, the Raiders had inched past the Steelers with a 7-6 lead. With no timeouts left, the Steelers scrambled to drive down the field. But 3 failed attempts to break past the Raiders' defensive line left only 22 seconds on the clock. Steelers head coach Chuck Noll called for Bradshaw to conduct 66 option circle, a pass play. Bradshaw's intended target would be rookie receiver Barry Pearson. If the Steelers did not get a first down, the ball would be turned to the Raiders and the 1972 season would be over. Up in the stands, Tony Stagno and Al Vento dug deep into Italian folklore. They had brought red cornos with them to place the Malocchio curse upon the Raiders. Inside one was a miniature man meant to represent the Steelers that was carved from ivory, brought out each time the team was on the offense. Stagno would claim that as he drew out the Malocchio for what could be the final play of the season, the miniature figure dropped out.
Bradshaw trying to get away, and his pass is broken up by Tatum. Tipped off! Franco Harris has it, and he's over! Franco Harris grabbed the ball on the deflection. 5 seconds to go. He grabbed it with 5 seconds to go and scored.
Stagno later claimed the moment Vento handed him the figure, Bradshaw's pass was deflected. Harris managed to clasp the ball between his stretched palms, quickly tucking it under his own left arm, and sprinted 60 yards into the end zone. 5 seconds remained on the clock. As fans, including members of the Italian army, rushed the field in jubilation, John Madden was arguing with the officials. No call had yet been made on the play as Madden grilled the officials over Rule 7, Section 5, Article 2, Item 1 of the NFL rulebook. Madden argued that the ball had touched the hands of Frenchy Fuqua, who had rushed out to make the catch, seeing Bradshaw struggling. If so, the ball could not legally be caught by Harris. But the city of Pittsburgh, which had effectively emptied onto the field, claimed the ball ricocheted off of Raider safety Jack Tatum, making Harris's catch legal. None of the 5 officials who were under the charge of referee Fred Swearingen could agree what they had seen. Swearingen soon disappeared into the dugout, becoming part of a brief conversation with Art McNally, the league's supervisor of officials. Much controversy abounds over what was said, but it was certain that McNally and Swearingen agreed the play was legal. The motion for touchdown was made, putting the Steelers up 12-7. The extra point was good, making it 13-7 Pittsburgh. The Raiders made one last attempt to rush down the field, but their fate was sealed. By 4 o'clock on December 3rd, 1972, the Steelers were celebrating their first ever playoff victory. The celebration spread across southwestern Pennsylvania into the wee hours, into the smallest of bars. West Mifflin man Michael Ord hopped onto a counter in one particular establishment and, in an allusion to the Catholic feast of the Immaculate Conception, he dubbed December 23rd as the Feast of the Immaculate Reception. Later that night, his girlfriend phoned Myron Cope about the name. Cope would use the term Immaculate Reception on the 11 o'clock news, assured a definitive title for the play. The truth is, there was anything but definitive about what the Immaculate Reception meant to everyone in Pittsburgh that night. The name itself would not start being used regularly for several more years. The Steelers were not immediately able to capitalize on their first playoff victory, losing the AFC Championship game against the undefeated Miami Dolphins. For the Oakland Raiders, they felt the NFL had robbed them of their opportunity to be back in the Super Bowl. On the ride back to California, Madden came to believe the only reason the officials ruled the Immaculate Reception legal was fear of what the fans would have done should the decision be overturned. They would exact revenge in the 1973 divisional round when they defeated the Steelers. But Franco's Italian army remained faithful. After all, their namesake's career was just getting started. By 1974, with a draft selection that would see 4 future Hall of Famers, the Pittsburgh Steelers completed the pieces to their puzzle. Facing the Raiders once again in the playoffs, they were victorious in the conference championship and found themselves at Super Bowl IX, defeating the Minnesota Vikings 16-6. Franco Harris was named the most valuable player of the game, the first of 4 Super Bowl victories for the 1970 Steelers, who would go down in history as one of the greatest American football dynasties of the 20th century. 50 years have now passed since the Immaculate Reception, and its significance is now clear. Prior to 1972, the Steelers had never won a playoff game. After 1972, the Steelers franchise became one of the most successful organizations in the league. At present, they have racked up 6 Super Bowls, 8 conference championships, and 24 divisional titles. Franco Harris would be the centerpiece of the Steelers' offense for 12 seasons, collecting 4 Super Bowl rings, a 9-time Pro Bowler, and completed his career with 12,120 yards rushed. His jersey is just the 3rd to officially be retired by the Pittsburgh Steelers. As for his Italian army, they were demobilized following Harris's trade to the Seattle Seahawks in 1984. But the legacy of Tony Stagno and Al Vento and the rest of the original army live on with Steeler Nation, the largest fan base of any team in the NFL. As the steel industry imploded, the city of Pittsburgh found something to rally behind with Steelers. Without the Immaculate Reception, the history of both Pittsburgh and all of sports would be very different.